And aside from being the overall chair for Think20, I am also the lead co-chair for the Task Force number 7 on reform multilateralism.
Both I and the Institute have for many years now been following and working on G20 related issues. It is the premier global economic governance forum, and while South Africa is a member in its own right, the fact that Africa, which is a huge continent and which also has significant developmental challenges, is not a member, has meant that many organizations, and certainly South Africa itself, has taken it as an objective to put forward African concerns and African challenges onto the G20.
Very interested to see how the T20 can help policymakers in the G20 accelerate climate action. Climate financing has to be completely transformed. Unless we can unlock trillions of dollars from the private sector to flow into the global south, the global south is not going to be able to get onto a net zero pathway and enable decarbonization to happen.
My main interest is it comes from the academy, because I teach international relations, and G20 is one of the main actors in the international system at present.
I really want to commend and congratulate India for having a presidency of the G20 focused on sustainable development goals. I think we have 460 million children in India. And if you count young people, it's maybe 70% of the population. If you count women, more than 70% of the population. So we are really pleased to see the commitment on SDGs, a focus on women-led development, children. That's part of the G20.
And I'm a very strong supporter of G20, but it's very much also of the T20. I think the T20 should play a very important role, bringing ideas, new concepts, evidence-based policies out of the box thinking to the G20.
My interest in G20 is abiding, and it is very important for us that India is the president of G20 now. It's going to have a 3-year runway. It's India, Brazil, South Africa, 3 developing countries. And this is the chance for us to really bring the concerns of the developing countries to the fore.
My main interest with the G20 would be participating and providing input for the Task Force 4 under the T20 on fueling green growth and transition.
Yeah. I really expect that we are going to move forward when it comes to progressive data and competition policy during the Indian presidency, and it's promising a lot.
I've been involved with the T20 and the T7 and the B20 and the B7 for quite a while. And I believe that those engagement institutions of the G20 and the G7 are very important to bring in not only new ideas, but also to hold the G20 and the G7 accountable, and also to build trust and understanding in the global community.
And the task force that I'm leading is to do with digital public infrastructure and making sure that it's inclusive, it's accessible, it's affordable, and how it can help bring about SDG goals and innovation across the world.
My primary interest here is CDGs. I work with CDGs during my times in Russian Federation. And here I also am included in Task Force 6, which is dedicated to CDGs.
I've been very active in a global think tank network like Think20, and it would be a good chance for me also to take up the opportunity with the Think Tank India, the Think20 India for this year, and then I myself contribute to the task force ones on macroeconomic issues and trade.
There are many issues, but what I'm thinking, because G20 always started in the West and continue carrying Westerner interest. And I think it's in India, it's in Asia, should also bring the view of this part of the world.
Well, the most pressing problem is climate change. And it's also the most challenging one. So I think that should be the primary concern.
India has already highlighted the fact that as a developing country, following another developing country in the chair, Indonesia, and being succeeded by two other developing countries, namely Brazil and South Africa in 2024 and 2025, provides India with a unique opportunity really to bind and to create a developing country priorities G20, not only presidency, but a sort of project that takes us through 2025 and beyond, that entrenches development concerns and development issues that reflect a developing country perspective into the agenda of the G20.
I think it is incumbent upon a platform like G20 at a time of global dysfunction to focus on how we can revive international community's faith in multilateralism and how we can ensure that global governance architecture remains coherent enough to tackle the challenges of the future.
The G20, of course, deals with a wide variety of topics, but I would say three of them are very important. Number one, I think we need to tackle the climate crisis, which is an existentialist crisis for the planet, as quickly as possible. Number two, we obviously have to ensure that the global trading system continues to work well. Right now, there are a lot of challenges that the global trading system is dealing with. And number three, we have to make sure that we can enable the global financing system to power sustainable development as per the SDGs laid out by the UN over the next few decades.
G20 is a format of multilateral dialogue, which is fundamental for solutions. Also, when you have in mind the conflicts that we have, the conflicts that we also have in Europe at the moment with the war, and there I hope that G20 and also the T20 process here, can be a vehicle to not lose the focus also on things like the climate change, for example.
G20 is quite an important coalition, but also a very strange coalition, because it's very difficult to arrive to a consensus, taking into consideration that you have central powers, the G7, and you have emerging powers, all the rest. This minilateral group now serves in a certain way as the catalyzer of a change in the international system that's been taking place since the 21st century.
Well, the world of today is a complex and a difficult world. We have many challenges, whether it's in economics, in trade, in security, environment, energy. And I think the G20 has two major roles. On the first, they can really negotiate new ways of policies, agree among the most important countries in the world on new policy directions, but also bringing new ideas to the table, new initiatives to the table, new best practices to the table, evidence-based policies to the table.
See, as the vision that's been laid out by the Honorable Prime Minister, it's about trickling down the effect of the G20 presidency to the youth and to the masses of the country. It's also about where we're headed to in terms of the future of the global community, how we engage with the global south, what is the economic future of the world at large, how are we headed towards with the projections of the recession sinking in, what is the future in terms of that, the post-pandemic effects which are being witnessed by the community.
In the world of today, the G20 should be focusing the most on staying a G20, not becoming a G19 or a G18. The second point is probably there is a room also, and this is floating around, for Africa as a continent or to be as a region to be better represented. Although that would raise a number of questions. And the third point is about using the convening power of the G20 and the finance track, that is the the core of the machine to push reforms in key topics such as climate finance, infrastructure investments, because the G20 can probably enhance the feasibility of a number of global goals.
Definitely, there is one huge problem currently to stop the war. I recall the motto of this conference: one family, one earth, one life. And we have to stop the invasion in Ukraine and focus on the real issues. And that's the issue of sustainability. And for those purposes, data play a substantial role. Without technological progress, we can't solve cannot solve all the issues that are connected to sustainable future.
These are really important issues. The role of the G20 in try to go direct straight to the big problems of the world today, and in my view, is to bring back the issue of trade, how to reform the system, how to use trade to develop the economy of mainly the countries that are not part of G20.
So there's a new economic model that has emerged from India, and this is the model which says that we must have this digital public infrastructure and private innovation on top of it. And this model has been successful at a scale that is now being recognized across the world. So our goal in Think Tank 20 now is to basically take the latent knowledge that we have and give it away, and so that everybody in the world can use it as we go forward.
I think the current global situation is complex. There is a certain stasis in the multilateral system. So there is less of multilateralism. There is a trend towards greater multipolarity and multi-alignment. But the large issues have remained unattended. The primary issue today is economic recovery from the pandemic. And there are the other great challenges of green transition, in fact, a just green transition, as well as ensuring adequate financing for connectivity and infrastructure. Healthcare also remains a matter of great importance around the world.
Well, the G20 has to focus on economic governance because this is what the G20 is about. It is about economic governance, setting the rules. 2 or 3 things have happened this year. We have the pandemic, we've got the war in Ukraine, and both these events have shaken up the global economic system to such an extent that it has increased poverty, it has increased inequality, and governments are also unable to manage these systems. So we have to work together as the G20 to find ways that, whether they're digital ways, whether they are ways that governments can work with each other, where the private sector can be involved, to ensure that things get back on track. And also, it's been 75 years since the old economic rules were written. We really have to press for reform of the multilateral economic system so that we can prepare our future generations for the next 75 years for an era that is digitized and not run by a small clique.
The Think20, the T20 is for me a very important part of the G20. In the Think20 you see all the institutions, the think tanks, universities, researchers bringing a lot of knowledge, a lot of facts, a lot of evidence-based policies to the table, and can bring new ideas to the table. And really, because we do need a lot of new ideas, new policies, but also fact-based policies. And the T20 can bring this to the G20 and lead the G20 in new policy directions?
Well, the T20 has a very important role just to give inputs, to take policy decisions. What would be important is the link between the T20 and the G20, that sometimes it happens that there is a gap. One thing is the think tank deliberations, and then just to arrive to a political consensus, things are change color?
It's to provide ideas, preferably ideas that are based on evidence, on sound research, so that the leaders can decide the better paths to pursue.
Yeah. So the T20 is one of the engagement groups of the G20, and its role really is to develop new ideas and to bring them into the global governance process. So to bring in ideas for solutions for our most pressing global concerns and crises, like the health crisis, the food, energy, and climate crisis, and thus help the policymakers to really make better policies. But the T20 is also really important to build a community and to build trust and understanding in the community. So it fulfills really a double role. And the last role it fulfills, it also has to hold the G20 and the policymakers accountable. So our role is also at looking at what policies have been decided on and if they are implemented. So it's bringing in new ideas, it's building a community and also holding the decision makers accountable.
The Think20's role is very limited as a leader in the engagement groups for purposes of the idea bank, of laying down the policy future of the G20 Presidency of India. And since there are 3 consecutive developing nation presidencies, it's going to be exceptionally important to ensure that the policy that's set out is covering the global principle and parameteria for the future as well.
Well, as you know, the Think20 is the ideas bank for G20, and under India's presidency, we have cast the net far and wide to ensure inclusivity, and we have also ensured that the voice of the Global South is fully represented. And this is in accordance with the vision of the Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, who has himself just concluded the Voice of the Global South Summit, in which we have tried to bring in the representatives of countries all over the world. We are also ensuring gender equality as well as vertical and horizontal inclusivity throughout India.
Well, I think that T20 is a huge process that contributes a lot of academic ideas and new ideas to G20 agenda. And the purpose of T20 is to agree on some highlights that can be represented during forum and ideas that can be discussed during this year of Indian presidency.
Well, Think20 has a very critical role in the G20 process, not only because it would complement the G20 process by providing suggestions and inputs that make the G20 process more effective, but it also could come up with ideas of trying to solve the current problems and also the future problems of the world. In that case, G20 can also serve as an idea bank for a G20 process. Yeah.
India has done a terrific job in terms of engaging all these different stakeholder groups and bringing them into the formal processes as well. We also need to bring India to the G20, which is open up India and all its rich diversity, its heritage, its culture, and all its talented people to our friends from the G20. And even as we are bringing G20 to India, we have to bring India to the G20 as well.
India should bring that Asian view, okay? This is must. And India should act like a great power. She is a great power now in terms of many standards. And India, with its population, its assets, in many things, should bring its experience. And mainly the issue of poverty and who is the cause of poverty. The issue of supply chains, which has been destructed since COVID and Ukrainian war. This is how world can cooperate to prevent another crisis in this issue.
I think it would be important to promote a greater representation in the T20, including of countries that are not members of the G20.
I think I have already seen that G20 has prioritized a lot of engagement groups. So we were very pleased to see the Y20, the Urban 20, the Think 20, but they also have, for the first time, a DRR working group under the G20 Sherpa track. So we see that they're getting a lot of diverse opinions and perspectives from not only the G20 members, but they're inviting a lot of leaders and thinkers and innovators from different parts of the world to represent the world, not only the G20 members. So I think this is really commendable and something that we look forward to participating.
I think India is uniquely placed to amplify the voice of some of the most vulnerable countries around the world, whose voices get drowned out into the great power politics of the moment. And therefore, not only bringing developed and developing countries together, but also making a case to the international community that as major powers look at their own interests, it is imperative for them to think of some of the most vulnerable, some of the poorest countries in the world that are facing huge developmental issues, which are inextricably linked to the larger geopolitics that unfortunately at the moment is taking the top billing. So I think India is uniquely positioned to take that conversation forward.
But I don't think India should do anything differently because India has not invested in these multilateral organizations. India doesn't need to change the process. It has to learn the system, and we have to use the system to put forward what we think is our contribution to the G20. And our big contribution is our digital public goods, which is what my task force is all about, renewable energy, and also looking at what developing countries should do, what they were promised, and how those promises should be fulfilled.
India is very well positioned in the world to be the G20 president today. They are connected to all parts of the world, to all countries of the world, so they can bring new policies to the table, but also bridging all the differences and the different countries, and also very much connecting the global south with the global north. Not so much emphasizing the differences, but mainly emphasizing where we have joint challenges and looking for joint solutions.
India is already doing a good job in bringing in the voices from the non-G20 countries. I think their voices also need to be heard. So, yeah, that would, and also making sure that this agenda, that all the topics and agendas that come out of the India G20 presidency needs to be carried over to the next presidency would be the most key aspect.
India has a power, size, and good examples to promote many good experiences, especially in the field of digital public infrastructure and implementing digital identities. And I truly hope that the Indian experiences will be truly appreciated among the partners.
So what is really, I mean, this is a special moment in time because the global community is facing so many crises on one hand, and the geopolitical environment is getting more conflictual from day to day. So cooperation today is more important than ever. And the G20 plays a really important role here to ensure cooperation and to ensure that the global community is working on solutions for those global threats and crises. And India plays a very important role here. The Troika by itself of the G20 plays a very important role because it's the first time that the Troika represents three emerging economies.
I think India has a great chance to reshape the G20. The G20 has always been reshaped by major global challenges and cataclysmic events. If the Asian financial crisis of 1997 gave rise to a dialogue at the level of the foreign ministers and governors of central banks, it was the global financial and economic crisis of 2008 which transformed the dialogue into a summit-level discourse. And now, at this point of time, I think the G20 needs a generous infusion of values, ethics, and a broad vision for the future in which the theme is more about sharing and caring and not just self-centered advantages in trade or technology.
The main objective, I think, of India is really, as I said, to bring the countries that are not part of the G20. That is the global south, the big countries that are not part of the old system. And as you can see, the old system is not working, functioning anymore. So you have to bring big countries and new big countries and to revolutionize the old system.
Well, India belongs to the global south, although as an emerging country, we have to see up to what extent India will still represent the global south interests or just trying to get to the sun like Icarus has its wings burnt.
India has a very natural role to play in the global south as one of the most populous countries in the world, as well as one of the largest economies in the world. India has always played a leadership role with respect to the global south, but increasingly as we forge a new development model, a development model that is based on digitization as well as decarbonization, we are demonstrating that the old farm to factory model of development can be replaced by a much better digitization and decarbonization development model, which can show the world how you can develop in a way that's sustainable, that is fair, and that is inclusive.
So India looking at the global south as being its voice is important, but we also need to get the voices of the global south here heard. The G20 is very influential, and we as India should be able to include those who don't necessarily have access to these elite multilateral engagements.
India is performing exactly a big role, that is to bring back exactly the role of countries that are not out of the division of the world. Now you have a world that is divided by China against the United States and vice versa, the world decoupling and all these things. And this is exactly what is against the interest of all developing countries.
India play very significant roles to keep the momentum going and even escalate the process that has been started last year by keeping up voicing the interest of global south and the interest of developing countries.